The fire roared like a beast, devouring the upper floors of the Halstead Tower with a terrifying hunger. Smoke billowed in thick, grey clouds, stinging the eyes and throat of anyone caught in its path. Alarms screamed through the building, echoing against the glass and steel, but one man's focus was on something far more immediate than chaos, a trapped figure barely clinging to consciousness near the stairwell. Dominic Kane, a single father working as a building maintenance supervisor, felt his heart hammer against his ribs as he ran through the smoke-filled corridor. He had no fancy equipment, no heroic training beyond the basic fire drills he had memorized 1,000 times, but he had a child at home, and that child depended on him to come back alive. He couldn't fail anyone here. Not now. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of courage, hit like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Touch of Kindness. You won't regret seeing what happens next. Dominic's lungs burned with each inhale, every step heavier than the last, as flames licked the walls, making the air shimmer with heat. Through the thick haze, he saw her, Serena Vor, the CEO of Halstead Enterprises, sprawled across the floor, her designer suit torn, eyes wide with shock and fear. She was trapped, her ankle pinned beneath the twisted metal frame of a fallen railing. Most people in the building had already evacuated, leaving her alone in a world of smoke and fire. And Dominic knew he couldn't wait for professional help. It wouldn't arrive in time. "Hold on," he shouted over the crackling inferno, though he wasn't sure she could even hear him. He dropped to his knees beside her, using all the strength in his arms to lift the railing just enough to pull her free. Pain seared through his hands and arms from the intense heat, and the smoke clawed at his throat, making every breath a desperate struggle. Serena's eyes locked onto his, and for a moment there was no fire. No chaos, just the raw, human panic of two strangers facing death together. Her first words, however, were not what he expected. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice trembling, not with gratitude, but with confusion and almost disbelief. There was no thank you, no polite acknowledgement of his risk. Just those 4 words, piercing through the chaos, making Dominic pause for a fraction of a second. He wanted to answer, to say something heroic, but there was no time, because someone has to. He finally managed, gripping her arm and pulling her toward the emergency exit. "And I don't like leaving people behind." The corridor seemed endless. Every step they took felt like running through a furnace, heat pressing down on them, smoke choking their lungs. But Dominic refused to let panic rule him. He counted each step, measuring their progress against the fire's unpredictable advance. Serena, though injured and terrified, clung to his arm with surprising strength. He realized then that she wasn't just a CEO in a suit. She was human, fragile, and frightened like everyone else. And yet she was alive because of his courage. As they neared the emergency stairwell, a beam above them groaned ominously and then collapsed, narrowly missing them. Dominic yanked Serena backward, his muscles screaming in protest, but they managed to tumble down the stairs together, coughing and gasping for air. The fire seemed to follow them, relentless and unforgiving, as if punishing Dominic for daring to save someone so far above his own station in life. But he refused to falter. His daughter Maren had once told him that true bravery wasn't about fearlessness, it was about moving forward despite fear. Those words echoed in his mind as he pushed on. Finally, they burst out onto the rooftop emergency exit, the city skyline stretching around them, indifferent to their struggle. The air was thick with smoke, but the sunlight poured in like a promise, blinding and beautiful. Dominic supported Serena as they made their way to the roof edge, where the fire department was just arriving, sirens screaming, hoses spraying water, firefighters shouting commands. A wave of relief swept through him, but it was tempered by exhaustion, pain, and the lingering fear of what could have happened. Serena collapsed onto a stretcher almost immediately, coughing violently, her eyes wide and unfocused. Dominic stood beside her, brushing soot from her face, trying to ensure she was conscious and breathing. For a moment he expected the gratitude, the traditional thank you, the kind of acknowledgement one assumes follows a heroic act. But instead, Serena looked at him with something far more complex, something that Dominic couldn't quite decipher. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling but sharp, cutting through the haze of adrenaline. "Dominic Kane," he replied simply. "Maintenance. Single dad. Just a guy who couldn't walk away." Her eyes widened as if the simplicity of his words shocked her. She didn't smile, she didn't cry, she didn't even nod. She just studied him with a depth of intensity that made him uncomfortable, as if trying to decode the mystery of why someone like him would risk everything for someone like her. The fire, the chaos, and the fear seemed to fade in that moment, replaced by a strange, quiet tension. Over the next few days, Dominic couldn't escape the images of that fire. He returned to his apartment, exhausted, bruised, and soot-stained, to the warm embrace of his daughter, who wrapped her tiny arms around him and asked if he was okay. "I'm fine," he lied, pressing a kiss to her forehead, trying to hide the lingering fear in his own heart. Yet at night, he found himself thinking about Serena Vor, the woman whose first words had stunned him, whose eyes had lingered on him longer than they had on the burning building itself. Serena, meanwhile, found herself haunted by the man who had saved her life. She was used to people praising her, acknowledging her power, her wealth, her position, but Dominic had not treated her like that. He had treated her like a human being, nothing more, nothing less, and it unsettled her. She couldn't recall the last time someone had seen her without expectation, without agenda, without the glint of ambition in their eyes. And now she couldn't stop thinking about him. Weeks passed. Dominic returned to his routine, cleaning offices, maintaining buildings, juggling work and parenthood. He never expected to hear from Serena again. She was a CEO, a woman with a life leagues apart from his own. But one morning he found an envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a note. "I owe you more than thanks. Would you meet me at the Halstead Tower cafeteria at 10 a.m. tomorrow?" Curiosity and caution warred within him, but he decided to go. The next morning he arrived at the Halstead Tower cafeteria expecting a formal acknowledgement, a polite gesture, maybe even a donation or reward. What he received instead was a quiet, unguarded moment he hadn't anticipated. Serena was sitting at a table, dressed casually, her hair pulled back, no suit, no perfume, just a woman who had survived death and carried the weight of gratitude differently than expected. She looked up, and Dominic saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, something rare and real. "I've been thinking about you," she said simply. "No thank you. No awkward, forced gratitude. Just truth, raw and unpolished. I've been thinking about the kind of people we ignore in life because we're too busy with our own chaos. You didn't ignore me." Dominic felt a lump rise in his throat, the words striking deeper than any heroics could. He wasn't used to recognition. Not in his line of work, not in a life where survival was measured in bills paid and bedtime stories told. But here, in this moment, he realized that what he had done mattered not for praise, not for acknowledgement, but because it had bridged two lives that might never have intersected otherwise. "I did what anyone should," he said quietly. "I didn't want someone to die alone in a fire, that's all." Serena studied him, then smiled a small, fleeting, utterly genuine smile. "And yet it's changed my life." She paused, her gaze softening. "I want to make sure you and your daughter have everything you need, no strings attached. But more importantly, I want you to know that someone sees you. Not the maintenance guy, not the single dad, just Dominic Kane. Someone who mattered when it counted." Dominic felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. A recognition of his own worth, his own courage, the quiet heroism in the everyday struggle of life. He thought of Maren, waiting at home, and the way her eyes lit up at small victories. He realized then that heroism didn't always come with applause, and sometimes it was just the quiet choice to act, to step forward, to care. Over the following weeks, Serena and Dominic formed an unlikely bond, built on shared understanding and mutual respect. She offered him opportunities, yes, but more importantly she offered him friendship, trust, and the chance to see himself differently. And though their worlds were vastly different, they were united by a moment of courage, a split second, where life and death collided. And one man chose to act when the world seemed to stand still. As they sat together one afternoon, looking out over the city from the same building that had once threatened to take her life, Dominic realized that sometimes the greatest victories weren't about escaping fire, they were about finding the humanity in someone else.